Well, Australia has been ranked the sixth most democratic nation on earth in the Economist Intelligence Unit's 2010 Democracy Index. The top five, by the way, are Norway, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden and New Zealand. North Korea came in last out of 167 nations surveyed. And in its index, The Economist finds that democracy across the globe has declined in the past 12 months. Well, joining us from London to discuss the report is The Economist Intelligence Unit's Director for Country Forecasting Services, Laza Kekic. Mr Kekic, thank you very much for your time tonight. How do you rank and compare democracy in different countries?
Well, our model, this is the third issue. We do it every 2 years, not every year. 2010 is the third issue, so we're comparing 2010 with the previous, which was in 2008. Our model looks at democracy in what scholars call a thicker or wider concept. So it's not just civil liberties and political pluralism, the electoral process, which are, of course, the sine qua non of democracy. They're all very important. But also wider things like political participation by people, the political culture, if it's conducive to democracy, which is important so that democracy can be sustained, and the functioning of government, because there's no point in bringing decisions in a democratic manner if they're not implemented. So it's this wider concept. There's 60 indicators across these 5 categories. And as you mentioned, what is quite clear is that for some years now there's been a sort of pause in the onward march of democracy, which has been going on for decades, more and more countries becoming democratic. The new thing is that now, since 2008, we actually have a retreat. The score has gone down in the majority of the world's countries, including some of the most developed ones in Western Europe.
Before we get on to the reasons why that may be the case, why there is that retreat in democracy, we'll be a little bit parochial for a moment and I'll ask you about Australia. What did you find here that encouraged you to rank it number 6 in the world?
Well, Australia's ranking improved a bit compared to last time. It's traditionally been one of the most democratic countries on earth. There's only 26 of these 167 are rated what we call full or consolidated democracies. The slight improvement in Australia is really because of what's happened elsewhere, not so much in Australia. By that I mean Australia was less affected by the big economic crisis, financial crisis of 2008-2009 than some of its peers in other parts of the developed world. So other countries deteriorated, whereas Australia stayed more or less the same. And I know also in this part probably one always looks at neighbors and the position of New Zealand. Probably the situation is the difference between New Zealand and Australia is very small. So for all intents and purposes, these countries are equal and as I said, one of the most democratic countries on earth.
Did you see, or did your team see any factors here that would perhaps suggest that there could be a damaging of the perception of democracy in Australia?
Well, that is always possible, but we have not yet, looking forward, this isn't a forecasting report as such. We're looking at what the situation is. This is a snapshot as of November 2010. So again, I emphasize some of these very negative trends that have been observed elsewhere have either not occurred in Australia or haven't occurred yet.
Let's look further afield. As you said there before, there's been this general decline. Tell us about some of the countries, particularly in Western Europe, which we would consider to be models of democracy in some respects.
Yes.
Why have they dropped back on the index?
Well, most of the countries had a deterioration. The most significant deterioration, which even led to a category fall, because countries are classified in different categories, were France. I guess that's the most significant one. But perhaps people will be less surprised by Italy and Greece, which Greece, of course, undergoing a severe crisis. It's a combination of circumstances. One is there's been an extraordinary reduction of public trust in countries' institutions, in political parties, governments, parliaments. And that is a long-standing process which has been greatly intensified and accelerated since the 2008 crisis. I can't overestimate how striking some of these results, as revealed by opinion surveys, are. The support for democracy, even in some of these long-standing democracies, has diminished, which to a certain extent is linked with the great difficulties of the crisis. Another one is we've seen quite a significant erosion of media freedoms across the globe, including even in some long-standing democracies. Again, in part can be linked to the consequences of the 2008-2009 crisis. Decline or problems in the functioning of government, increase in corruption. So, taken all together, these are the reasons why so many countries have, in our view and in our model, regressed over the years.
And would you suggest, therefore, and I know it's a crystal ball question in some respects, is this an aberration, and those countries that are now categorised as flawed democracies, will they become full democracies again, or are they now on a path which could become from bad to worse?
Well, that's a very good question. In my view, I think it's on a razor's edge. Really, both outcomes looking forward are possible. As I mentioned, we've had a negative trend for a while now, after decades of an onward march across the globe of democracy. But at the moment, even we didn't speak very much about the authoritarian regimes. There's still 55 of those in the world, including, of course, China, the biggest. They've, in fact, grown more confident, and there seems to be little sign that they're moving in a more democratic direction. I guess in a nutshell, a lot really depends on how the world economy and this terrible financial crisis affected much of the world, how that pans out. We've had a bit of a recovery in 2010, but this is all still very, very fragile. As we see across the globe, unemployment is increasing, there's social unrest in a lot of countries, and that, of course, does not bode well for democracy.
And in a few of those 5 major categories you use on your index, notably civil liberties, the functioning of government and political culture, I have one big word for you: WikiLeaks. Can you imagine how much do you think the current furor sparked by these leaks may shape perceptions of democracy and confidence in political institutions in the next lot of research you do for your democracy index?
Yes, another very, very good question, and this is something obviously that will have, I think, an enormous impact. I mean, just to mention one thing, again, a lot depends on how the powers that be, in this case, in particular the U.S., respond to this. The initial responses are aggressive and so on, do not bode well. After all, it was the U.S. that, I think rightly, in previous years took to task many countries for interfering with Internet and interfering with media freedoms, and such accusations will ring hollow if the U.S. does the same with respect to WikiLeaks. But over and above that, of course, depending on what sort of revelations we get, the public confidence in institutions, which is already tenuous, as I said, and been declining in so many countries, might decline further.
Laza Kekic from the Economist Intelligence Unit. It's been terrific speaking with you tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.